Hey, what's going on, Los Angeles? Welcome in to the Salute to Troy podcast brought to you by BetOnline. Very special guest today. First and foremost, welcome Coach Rowe. Welcome Jamal Madney, my two co-hosts. And then we got the big guest of the hour, my, I guess we can say old friends, old acquaintances, chatter here and there. But Mr. JD Pickell hosts the Hard Count podcast on On3. But man, what's going on, man? Thanks so much for taking the time and talking SC with us today.
Brother, glad to be on with y'all. I appreciate you guys making some time to squeeze me in here. I'm excited to talk to y'all.
No, thank you for taking the time. I love the office. The glass warehouse, if you will, looks great back there.
I appreciate. I kind of feel like I'm doing like an interview from The Office, like the TV show, like where they kind of sit them back behind and they talk about something crazy that happened. So if you see me like do the little Jim face during that, and I'll kind of go like that's something's going on behind me, I'm sure.
Perfect. Yeah, I was in a WeWork for like a year, so that's how all the WeWorks were. So I get that where you just see everyone. But
Ryan, when can we get an office like that?
I mean, one day, hopefully. One day. You're in an office right now, just not ours.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, I shared this offline, but I want to share it. I think it's cool anyway with our audience. But me and JD met. It was technically 2020. The start of 2020 at the Miami Super Bowl on Radio Row. First time JD was thinking of starting a podcast about the Ivy League, and the world shut down, and now here you are on On3 doing your own show, big time. So I just wanted to give you a shout out, man, for the hard work, and here we are 4 years later, and you got a national show doing it daily. So congrats to you. I think that's awesome.
I appreciate that, man. I feel very, very fortunate, and yeah, grateful to be on a winning team here at On3. But yeah, that was crazy. That was 2020, right before the world just totally shut down. Y'all were doing your thing on Radio Row. I was tagging along with Jake Olson, trying to shake some hands and meet anybody possible. So yeah, I'm glad that we crossed paths, and this is cool. We're doing it now here several years later. Thankfully coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. Long time coming. So, well, great. Well, I'll get this rolling and then toss it over to my co-hosts. But, USC, it's been a wild, we can even just call it a year, if you look a year ago today, all the hype going into spring ball with the returning Heisman, Caleb Williams, year 2 of Lincoln Riley. There were national championship aspirations. I was at the spring game, and it was just a lot of excitement. We talked on the show a lot about the expectations, and obviously fell flat in the 2023 season. But now you get to the offseason and you see all these coaching changes, and D'Anton Lynn as the DC and co-DC and Coach Henney and all these, and now recruiting, which we'll get to in a minute, which obviously is your expertise. But just from an outside view, not from LA, not from USC, what's kind of been your perception of this SC offseason, and as they've kind of in a way rebuilt the culture, rebuilt the program, and rebuilt the perception of who they are as a football program?
So I actually went to high school in Orange County, right near the Villa Park area. I went to Orange Lutheran. So got to see USC from a bit of a distance, but kind of moved all over. So I say all that to say USC as a brand nationally, as I still live here in Nashville, still holds a lot of weight. Maybe they haven't had the success they wanted to have over the course of the last season, definitely with all the expectations. But I think when I look at where USC is right now going into the Big Ten, there's a lot of chatter at this time of the year because we all have, a couple months here with no games being played. And so the narrative kind of evolves from the last snapshot we got of, specific teams. And USC, the snapshot in our mind is, okay, good offense typically with Lincoln Riley. The defense, though, hey, Lincoln Riley, he doesn't coach defense. And part of that is true. Lincoln Riley actually has nothing to do with the defense. Now, you're responsible as a head coach for your defensive staff. And I think it's difficult to quantify how much of a difference a new staff can have on a position room, on a defense, from a confidence standpoint. So I think D'Anton Lynn being hired, and I think Eric Henderson, what he's brought on the recruiting trail, I'm excited to see the new energy and the new juice at USC, because I will say this, I don't think the personnel is nearly as far off as folks like to pretend it is. Bear Alexander, I know he's just one dude, did some good things at USC last year. He was taking snaps at Georgia as a true freshman. So they got some Jimmies and Joes. They can develop them and put them in position to be successful. I think there's a little bit more of a bump coming for USC than most folks want to believe.
Yeah, JD, it's a great, it's a great point. And speaking of, going into 24, already a lot of recruiting success in terms of kind of the interior in the trenches on the defensive line. Justice Terry, Isaiah Gibson. Feels like a lot of these guys want to play for Eric Henderson. Now, so these are class of 25 guys, of course, but there seems to be sort of a pipeline of talent being developed. how do you see kind of this 24 season on the road to 25 now that there seems to be an emphasis on the defensive side with this staff? What do you think is the ceiling for SC in 24?
Well, I saw Vegas put their over-under win total at 7.5, which I understand last year you had the Heisman Trophy winner and won 7 ball games during the regular season. But to me, I'm looking at USC, and the question mark is kind of the same as it was last year of, okay, well, how good can they be if they field just a somewhat decent defense? Because as good as the offense was last year, it felt like the defense was every bit as bad. Like, what if the defense allows 24, 25 points a game their first year in the Big Ten? Like, I understand you don't have Caleb Williams playing quarterback, but I don't think as long as Lincoln Riley is running the show, they're going to have some massive drop-off there. So it's definitely a massive first impression year for USC, and not just to the rest of the conference and, to kind of figure out how they feel confidence-wise moving forward. But I think it's massive from an optics standpoint on the recruiting trail. Because if USC, this is kind of the way I've thought about this since the season's ended. There's a lot of talk around what they can't do, and they're not tough enough. They're not this, they're not that. Well, you move into a line of scrimmage conference that has kind of made their brand on being that blue-collar, tough kind of conference with Michigan and Iowa and Wisconsin. So, like, let's say Lincoln Riley walks out there with this new defensive staff and they just kind of up the score a little bit and they have a big jump defensively. Like, folks are going to say, oh, okay, that's the new USC. That's the new defensive staff they put together. That's the new brand of Lincoln Riley. So I think it's a massive year for optics. But again, I really think that everyone's kind of left USC's defense for dead and kind of written them off based on what happened with the previous defensive staff. And I feel a little bit differently about that.
JD, I'm gonna switch it over here a little bit to back to the national brand. I'm gonna stir the pot here a little bit. So I have 2 questions for you. My first question is: you see a lot of these players coming from the Southeast, right? And a lot of people know who watch the show. I hate the Southeastern Conference because they've been cheating for so long. And they've been able to get away with it. Now the Rabbit has a gun, and you see a lot of these dudes coming from Florida, coming from Georgia. Normally Southeastern schools. Is that the national name? Or is it that's just because Eric Henderson, DeAnton Lynn is hitting the recruiting trail hard? And then my second question is UCLA football a national name, or they're just like a mid-major?
I think the fact that I'll touch on UCLA really quick because that's probably the most straightforward answer. They're in the Big Ten, a little bit of a transition year. I know the folks that listen to this podcast aren't going to be thrilled with me saying that they're not having the sky fall out there in Westwood, but UCLA will give them some time. I will say I think USC is definitely in a better position entering into the Big Ten. But speaking to what you said about where they're getting these recruits from in 2025, I think some of that is definitely Eric Henderson, and you got Aaron Donald there during that visit weekend, and you got the pedigree of D'Anton Lynn as well with what he did at UCLA. To me, the thought has always been like, if you want to have the same product as the Georgias, the Bamas, the LSUs, whatever, who have great, trench play historically, like, you got to shop at the same grocery store. You got to shop in that same aisle. And so to flip a Justice Terry and to bring him to Southern California, it's just one dude. And I know this class is still developing and they're still, sort of taking shape. We got a long way till pen meets paper, but that's a good sign. The awareness to know, hey, I got to have these guys from this region of the country to compete with those guys who also recruit from this region of the country well. I think it shows a lot of self-awareness. And also, like, let's call a spade here. Like, NIL is a massive factor today in acquiring top talent. I don't pretend to know exactly where USC sits in relation to, the deep pockets, but I have to believe, man, if USC wants to play ball for a kid, good for them, more power to them. And a lot of folks like to say, oh, well, USC threw a bag and that's why he committed. And I'm like, so your school could have thrown a bigger bag and got him. Like, let's kind of just let's have a transparent conversation. If you're not able to meet that price point and USC is, then don't cry about being broke. You know what I'm saying? So I like where USC stands there as well.
Yeah, it's a good transition. I was actually going to bring that up, so that's perfect. I know these guys were giving me a hard time before we started, but I was fortunate enough to meet Julian Lewis just a few days ago. He was out here on a visit and doing some NIL meetings and whatnot, and obviously the 5-star quarterback 2025 class out of Georgia. And so none of us know everything going on with NIL with any program. Even us that cover SC don't know as much as we'd like. But just you being in kind of SEC country and everyone, the perception nationally at least is that the SEC has kind of NIL more down than maybe the rest, specifically the Pac-12 outside of Oregon conferences. So kind of what's your perception on the NIL as a whole, how maybe USC fits into that, and how powerful that is in getting these kids. Because you alluded to it, 3 Georgia kids in this 25 class committed right now. Obviously, it's going to be a lot of work to retain them, and NIL comes into that. But just kind of just expand on more on what you said of your perception of NIL as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a unique time if you're a college football fan in terms of you have the greatest impact on the Saturday product than you've ever had before. Like, it used to be, hey, donate to this fund that's going to go to us getting better facilities so we can, in theory, attract more 5 stars and win more ball games. Now it's like, hey, put the money in the bag because we're going to go pay this kid to bring him to start at quarterback or to start at receiver or to start at edge defender. Like, help us bring 5 stars to Los Angeles. And like, I mean, we know the cost of living in Southern California. It is what it is for a reason. If you're a USC fan, you're in the USC area, you probably are doing okay for yourself when it comes to, the dollars and cents of it all. And so I think USC long term, as long as they have something to rally around and to give money to get people excited on the field, I think they're going to be in really good shape. Now, I would also say that there's a lot of schools in the Southeast as well that probably have that same sentiment. But I think we're entering into an era where your care factor, like how much you care as a fan about your football team and how much you're willing to care from a dollars and cents standpoint, I think that you have, the greatest impact you ever could have had. And I think USC will benefit from that in the long run.
JD, just to sort of piggyback on that, who do you see in terms of the pecking order? Obviously, it's been kind of SEC dominant, this sport, the last 15 years. And prior to that, the Big Ten kind of had their renaissance. And outside of SC, it's been kind of few and far between moments for the Pac-12. How do you see culturally who's going to care the most moving forward in this new world? And then B, where do you see this new world going? Obviously, a lot of conversation around legislation and, the unionization of players and potentially players becoming employees of the university that could eliminate kind of the collective structure and university athletic departments can directly pay players and kind of cut out the middleman in a sense. So part A, who do you see caring the most moving forward? And then B, where do you see the sport going the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
I think to answer part A, when it comes to who cares the most of those new entries into the Big Ten, is that what you're referring to?
Just overall, do you think there's going to be a world where some folks that cared a lot are going to care less, or folks that maybe you see are going to kind of double down on the passion and the conviction, or stay the same? What are you kind of seeing in terms of the trends? Yeah,
I will say, I know that this is not an SEC, friendly necessarily kind of platform we're on right now, but I will say, man, seeing Missouri and I think anonymous $62 million donation they got, that a portion of that will go to NIL, shows they're willing to play ball. Ohio State and what they did through the transfer portal and landing some top guys that I'm sure didn't come at a cheap price point with the profile of player they are. I mean, they're clearly playing ball. So I think the big brands, for one, that have the backing and support of a fan base, specifically those ones I just named, among others, those are just kind of the ones that come off the top of the head. And then I think the teams and the organizations, administrations that are seeing where this is going and not resisting it. Because I think it's one of those things where either use NIL right now or have it used against you. And if you don't use it right now, well, someone's going to use it against you to bring that talent to their school from the portal or on the recruiting trail, whatever it ends up being. And then you're fighting to climb out of a hole because you delayed your NIL, awareness a good 6 months, 2 years, whatever. The second part of that question, where I think this whole thing is going, on a macro level, I'm grateful to cover college football. There's so much legal jargon that I just quite frankly have no idea what it means. So I bring people onto our show to talk about it and make me smarter about it. But I will say it feels like a lot of the people keep talking about player revenue sharing with the TV deals. There's so much money. The players got to get some of that. So it feels a lot like when the college football playoff first kind of got some traction. You got some voices kind of talking about it. It grows larger and larger in terms of the buzz. Then more important people start talking about it. And then at some point in time, it's like, bam, the news breaks on your phone. You get the update from On3 via Twitter page. And then they say, hey, players are going to earn X amount of revenue. So I think that's going to probably be something that happens here sooner rather than later. Then on a macro level, who knows where we're headed from the conference realignment standpoint, but that could be a whole 2-hour conversation in itself. But I don't think the ACC exists how we know it to be right now in the next 3 years. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I was just about to say that, JD. And my buddy Ryan, not Ride Die, but a guy I coached with a couple years back. We always say this, like, eventually there won't be any conferences. It's going to be levels. Like, it's going to be a super level, and there's going to be the rest of them, right? And the ACC has their schools locked up 2036 into 2037 or something like that. And then you have Clemson and Florida State fighting that right now. Do you eventually see college football going to a point to where it's like it's all access? Just the blue bloods have their one conference, and then it's everybody else, and then it's lower level than that because of the NIL, because of the money, because of the TV revenue.
The short answer is I hope not. There was an article that came out yesterday on The Athletic. I think it was Stuart Mandel, that like 20 sports executives pitched this idea of like an 80-team super league with like 70 of those teams, I'm assuming being the big brands, the blue bloods and whoever, and then like 50 teams fighting to be in a group of 10 to compete in that top league. So that whole thing was kind of wild. And it, honestly, unfortunately, it made a lot of sense. So I guess the short answer is I think we're probably moving towards that. And I personally wouldn't be a fan of that. I think there is still something to having specific conferences and having the bowl bids. And I'm probably one of the last folks on that island, saying that I'm a fan of having the conferences the way they are. But I keep viewing college football, for me, it's a lot like a national park. Like, we love Yosemite, we love the Grand Canyon, like we love it for what it's always been. And there's some imperfections for sure that maybe need to be fixed within college football, from revenue sharing to NIL to transfer portal. Like, we're still kind of figuring these things out. But to me, I don't know that the solution is let's put a theme park in the middle of the Grand Canyon or in Yosemite. Like that'd be cool. Some people would like it, and there would be a lot of money to be made from that. But I don't know that that's like the answer to our question. I think people love college football because it's college football, and the further away we get from what we've recognized over the game's history, that makes me a little bit nervous. But unfortunately, going back to your question, I think that's probably the direction we're headed.
You guys mind if I follow up with another question?
Go for it.
Please.
So here's my question. We know the ACC's done. Like,
yep,
it's in the air. The ACC's done. We know where Florida State, Miami, Clemson. We know they're probably going to the SEC. Duke, North Carolina, their basketball guys are probably going to the Big Ten. Now you have Wake Forest, North Carolina State, the Syracuses of the world. Louisville has a decision to make. Are we going to go to the SEC, or are we going to try to go to the Big Ten? But the bottom tier of that conference, where do they go? Do they end up like Oregon State and Wazoo, or do they build another Calen, Stanford? What happens to them, right? Do they go Big 12? Like, what happens to the bottom tier of the Atlantic Coast Conference? And does that, you know what I mean? Is that starting to tier towards that super conference that you were just talking about, and then that I asked you about?
No, yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think it definitely is. I think what you said at the top of that is probably the most intriguing is Florida State, Clemson, Miami. Like, where do they go? Because to me, I'm like, if I'm the SEC and I'm the Florida Gators, I'm doing everything in my power, pounding the table, standing on the table, throwing things to keep Florida State out of the SEC, because we want to be that school in this conference. So I don't know if they'll be successful in doing that, but maybe the Big Ten wants to be that national conference, go from Florida out to California. So that's a whole thing in itself. But yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Like, at some point in time, there's only so many chairs to sit in while the music's going in this conference realignment thing. Like, there's not necessarily going to be a spot for everybody when the music stops. There's not that many chairs. So I wonder if maybe we get kind of a island of misfit teams that sort of form their own conference, and maybe it's some equivalent of what we would think of like a group of 5 conference right now, or group of 4 conference right now. But yeah, it's anyone's game. Maybe they go independent, and maybe they find a way to structure TV deals to make it work that way. And this is kind of where we get into the weeds, where I'm like, y'all, I don't know, but I'm very grateful to know people that are smarter than me, that went to law school and didn't just watch Suits and take every single legal insight from that show. Like, I'm calling somebody else and saying, what's going on here? Can you come on our show and talk about it? Because to me, it's all very, very interesting. It feels like it changes too with every single week.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, we talk about it all the time since it's kind of started going on, and even what we think changes, because I mean, who really knows? I mean, we could see more teams go independent in the next couple of years or whatnot, like Notre Dame. But JD, we'll each do one more question here and get you out of here on this. But taking it back to kind of SC and looking to this future season, it's extremely intriguing game to open the year, and obviously we're way far from that. Still got to play spring ball. Got the spring game here in a couple of weeks, but SC, LSU, in Vegas. You get that Big Ten SEC matchup. It's already started the chatter on Twitter between both fan bases. LSU's receivers going up against this new look defensive backfield that is coached by Coach Belk out here. So just kind of what's your intrigue being down there in kind of Nashville for that opening game? I mean, to me, that's the most intriguing game on the slate for opening weekend.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, there's so much newness to it both sides. Like brand new defensive staff for USC and for LSU. Like Brian Kelly cleaned house for how bad his defense was a year ago. That was not up to standard. New quarterbacks for both sides. So yeah, there's a lot of newness kind of to break in there. Feels like to me it's a chance to really set the tone for USC, because you're not walking out there and opening with, San Jose State or San Diego State, God bless them. Like you're opening with a very visible game. It's going to be played on a Sunday, I believe, against a national power in LSU. Like you go out there and make a statement in that game and show that it's a brand new outfit with this new defensive staff. Like I think there's a chance for there to be kind of that confidence builder of sorts. Like we all saw Texas go into Tuscaloosa and do what they did. I think that really propelled Texas through the course of their season when they got into those tough spots where they don't have their quarterback or they're not at full strength. Like they were able to kind of rely back on that game and remind themselves who they were. So I know it's early. I don't want to take too much from one game, but I think it really is a chance to be a tone setter for the good folks out there in Los Angeles and for this new defensive staff.
So I'm gonna roll with this, and I saw you said Vegas set it at 7.5, and I've been saying this for a while. SC had the best advantage of having a spring game in December, right? So with their Holiday Bowl, when you look at it, their whole roster were all backups. Miller Moss first start. There's a bunch of kids who didn't get a lot of reps. They have the opportunity to play a live game against somebody else. So this is a team of 2 spring games. Once people actually notice that, how far forward do you think that propels SC?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess that probably goes back to how you feel about Jaden Mayava and how you feel about Miller Moss, who's going to be the guy there. It sounds like Miller Moss has kind of got the slight edge right now, if I had to guess. But I think it's an edge definitely offensively, especially if it is Miller Moss. I think defensively, there's probably still an acclimation period. But the fact that, you said it, the fact that you're out there playing a college football game, for the second time and not for the first time, if you're one of those young bucks, like experience is one of your greatest assets as a competitor. So I think that's massive. And how much is a great question. I'm not sure, but I think the dividends would be paid more by a Miller Moss, being able to see the college game a little bit more in real time and not have to make his first start against LSU.
Yeah. Jamal, you got one more? You want me to take us home?
No, I think you can take us home, right?
All right. Well, JD, always appreciate the time. I'll end with this question. I guess it was probably almost a few months ago. This year is flying by. You had Lincoln Riley on your show. Great interview. Watched it. A lot of good stuff in there. I think it's always so much more valuable when you can get coaches and players on for a one-on-one podcast style interview than just being, in the press room or on a Zoom with a bunch of media people. So for you, what was your biggest takeaway from that? Getting Lincoln Riley for 15, 20 minutes kind of on your own. What was your biggest takeaway from him?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. I think there's just such a reputation that seems to precede Lincoln Riley, whether it be when he left Oklahoma or the defense or whatever. And I think after getting to talk to him, it was just like, this is a guy that is bent on winning. And that sounds sort of simplistic, but like we talk about the defense and he wasn't shying away from any of those questions. He wasn't, he didn't seem uncomfortable answering that. He's like, yeah, it hasn't been good enough. Here's what we're doing to fix it. Here's what I'm doing to fix it. And it wasn't this defensive manner from him and how he answered those questions, which I thought was interesting. Like he wasn't saying, well, he wasn't trying to explain to me why it wasn't working with Alex Grinch running the show. He's like, yeah, it wasn't good enough, not up to my standard. And just a guy. It felt very human to me hearing Lincoln Riley talk about it, and it just kind of came across as someone who is truly doing everything in their power to get USC to where they want to be, where he expects them to be, and where that fan base expects to be.
Love it. Yeah, no, it was great. So I enjoy watching it, and keep up the great work. JD Pickell, the hard count on On3. Man, we really appreciate the time, and love seeing your journey, and you continue to grow and blow up. So keep crushing it, all right?
Means a lot, man. I really appreciate it. Hey, look at this, man. We're doing a show after COVID, 4 years from then. I'm glad we got to do this, and anytime I can come on here, man, always a blast. So thank you.
Yeah, look at us. It's that Hot Ones quote, right? Look at us. Who would have thought?
Not me.
Yeah,
not me.
Yeah, well, here we are. But appreciate the time. Thank you all. This is the Salute to Troy podcast. We'll catch you guys all back here in just a couple days.
Live free, fight on.